Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. Today, we're going to be talking more alongside the social aspect of the 1920s. So, buckle up. Let's go. Let's get into it. Short, a short enough section, a short enough lesson in your textbook, but it packs a big old punch. So, changing ways of life. Module 8, Lesson 3. All right, that was your warm up about Mr. Capone. Objectives, we're going to describe how life was like for Americans during the 1920s, critique the pros and cons of prohibition. We're going to examine fundamentalist belief about biblical creation and discuss the significance of the Scopes trial. So, small town vibes. America changed dramatically in the years before 1920, as was revealed in the 1920 census. 51.2% of Americans lived in communities with populations of 25,000. No, it's 2,500 to more than 1 million people. And from 1922 to 1929, migration to cities accelerated with around 2 million people leaving farms and towns each year. The agricultural world that millions of Americans left behind was largely unchanged from the 19th century. And it was a world of small towns and farms bound together by conservative moral values and close social relationships. Yet the small town attitudes began to lose their hold on American minds as the city rose to prominence. The idea of the city. So, thinking your small town, rural families, everyone was a farmer back in the day. All right, change of pace. So, at the beginning of the 1920s, New York City had about 5.6 million people, Chicago with around 3 million people, and Philadelphia with a little less than 2 million people. Another 65 cities claimed that they had over 100,000 people, and more they grew more crowded by the day. Life in the cities were far different from the slow paced, intimate life in America's small towns. Chicago, for example, was different, home to native born whites, African Americans, immigrants like the Polish, Irish, Russian, Italians, Swedish, Arabs, French, and Chinese, a whole hodgepodge of everything. Each day, around 300,000 workers, 150,000 cars and buses, and 3,000 streetcars filled the pulsing downtown. At night, people crowded into ornate movie theaters and vaudeville houses, offering variety of shows. Small town migrants had to adapt to the urban environment demands of change in thinking as well as everyday living. City dwellers read and argued about current scientific and social ideas. They judged one another by accomplishment more than by background. They tolerated drinking, gambling, and casual dating. Shocking and sinful by the conservative way of thinking. For all the color and change, the city could be impersonal and frightening. Streetcars were filled with strangers, not friends and neighbors. Life was fast paced, not leisurely, and lonely migrants ached for home, finding themselves caught between rural and urban cultures. It was a tug of war, that pitted safe small town world of close ties, hard work, and strict morals against a big city world of anonymous crowds, moneymakers, and pleasure seekers. This tension between traditional rural attitudes and modern urban lifestyles was both a reflection of and a reaction to changes in American society. And these conflicts would be expressed in several ways. So here's a image of a city during the 1900s. Here's a theater playing Don Juan. This is a picture from St. Louis. People dancing in the street. We go dancing in the street. Okay, you don't need to write all those A's. Just write alcohol. So, one vigorous clash between small town and big city Americans began in earnest 1920 January when the 18th Amendment went into effect. The 18th Amendment launched the era known as Prohibition, test question, during which the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages was prohibited. Reformers had long considered the liquor as a prime cause of corruption. They thought that too much drinking led to crime, wife and child abuse, accidents on the job, and other serious social problems. Support for prohibition came largely from the rural South and West, which was inhabited by native born Protestants. So, two groups, test question, two groups that were against or supported prohibition whereas the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Both helped pass along this amendment because of their propaganda, whatever you want to call it, not propaganda. So at first, saloons will close their doors and arrests for drunkenness will decline. But in the aftermath of World War I, many Americans were tired of making sacrifices. They just wanted to enjoy life. Let it happen. Most immigrant groups did not consider drinking a sin, but a natural part of socializing, and they resented government meddling in their affairs. So eventually, the government will seal Prohibition's fate when it failed to budget for enough money to enforce the law. So, test question, the Volstead Act established the Prohibition Bureau in the Treasury Department 1919, but again, that agency too was underfunded. The job of enforcement involved patrolling 18,700 square miles, not square, 700,000 miles of coastline, 18,700 miles. There we go. Of coastline as well as inland borders, tracking down illegal stills, monitoring highways for truckloads of illegal alcohol, and overseeing the industries that legally used alcohol to be sure that none was siphoned off for illegal purposes. That task fell to approximately 1,500 poorly paid federal agents and local police. It's clearly an impossible job. Sounds like it. So here you got, your first images of binge drinking. Chug, chug, chug. Here's what happens when you got caught with your alcohol. They just poured it down the sewers. How about all that money? What a waste. I believe these are people trying to sell off their alcohol. They don't look like they're showing it off. No booze sold here. Booze hounds stay out. And here you have some propaganda. Wet or dry was the phrase. Wet if you supported alcohol, supported prohibition. Dry if you were against it. So here you have a fat, wealthy guy saying, "Vote wet for my sake," and this also says he's a brewer. Vote dry for mine, and here you have a mom raising 3 kids on her own. Shall mothers and children be sacrificed for the financial greed of the liquor traffic? It's up to you, voter, decide. I love this one. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. The Women's Christian Temperance Union. Again, women are the one who birth children. So, it is what it sounds like. All right, bootleggers. So to obtain liquor illegally, drinkers went to underground hidden saloons and nightclubs known as speakeasies. If you recall, in the movie Great Gatsby, the Leonardo DiCaprio version, that's this scene. Speakeasies could be found everywhere: penthouses, cellars, rooming houses, office buildings, tenements, hardware stores, and tea rooms. To be admitted, you had to present a card or say a password. Before long, people will grow bolder in getting around the law. They learned how to distill their own alcohol and they built their own stills. Since alcohol was allowed for medicinal and religious purposes, prescriptions of sacramental wine intended for church skyrocketed. Oh, that's funny. People also bought liquor from bootleggers. Bootleggers will smuggle alcohol in from Canada, Cuba, and the West Indies. And here's one of the cons of Prohibition. Prohibition had a devastating unintended consequence. Not only did it generate disrespect for the law, it contributed to organized crime in nearly every major city. Chicago became home of the notorious Al Capone, whose bootlegging empire netted $60 million a year. How did Capone come about? Well, he took control of the Chicago liquor business by killing off his competition. Well, you don't have competition if they're all dead. Headlines in Chicago reported about 522 bloody gang killings and made the image of the flashy Al Capone part of the folklore of this time period. So you got happy people drinking. That's Al Capone and his cigar. That's a bootlegger. Disregard that. Bye, bye, bye. So by the mid 1920s, the only 19% of Americans supported prohibition. The rest wanted the amendment changed or repealed. They believed prohibition caused the worse effects than the initial problem. And rural Protestant Americans will defend the law that they felt strengthened moral values. So sadly, the 18th Amendment would remain in force until 1933, when it was repealed by the 25th Amendment. Here you have some people celebrating that. In compliance with the 18th Amendment, no intoxicating liquor allowed on the premises. And here you have people making fun of that, drinking in front of their face. All right, fundamentally wrong. So, the Protestant Christian movement, grounded in its literal interpretation of the Bible, known as fundamentalism. Test question. Fundamentalists were skeptical of some scientific discoveries and theories and argued that all important knowledge could be found in the Bible. They believed in the Bible was inspired by God, and therefore its stories and all of their details were true. It is believing the Bible is true, word for word, as is. Their beliefs will lead fundamentalists to reject the theory of evolution, which was advanced by Charles Darwin in the 19th century. His theory stated that all species of plants and animals descended from common ancestors, and the biggest implication they found was with the most objectionable trait was that humans were related to apes. They pointed out that the Bible's account of creation, in which God made the world and all life forms, including humans, was done in 6 total days. Preachers in the South and the West will lead religious revivals based on the authority of the scriptures. In the 1920s, fundamentalists gained followers who began to call out for laws prohibiting the teaching of evolution. Can't teach my kid that. I don't want it. So here you got a preacher. We're right. And then for the non-fundamentalist, Darwin is right. Just for show. So in March 1925, Tennessee passed the nation's first law that made it a crime to teach evolution. Immediately, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, still around to this day, promised to defend any teacher who would challenge the law. John T. Scopes, a young biology teacher, accepted the challenge and was promptly arrested, and his trial was set for July. The ACLU hired Clarence Darrow, the most famous trial lawyer of the day, to defend Scopes. And I just realized I made a boo-boo. Need to go back. This seems to be all red. Oh no, it didn't change. There we go. So, Clarence Darrow was very popular at the time. He will defend Scopes. William Jennings Bryan, there's that guy again. There's that name, Mr. Heart of Gold speech, Cross of Gold speech, 3 times Democratic Party nominee, 3 times a loser. He will serve as the trial's special prosecutor. So, in the trial, there was no real question the guilt or innocence of Scopes, as he was very honest and forthcoming, saying that, yeah, I taught evolution, arrest me. But the trial was in part a fight over the idea of evolution and its role of science and religion in public schools in American society. The trial started July 10th, 1925, and instantly became a national sensation overnight. Darrow, in one of the days, the first couple of days of the trial, will call on Bryan to testify as an expert on the Bible because he was a strict fundamentalist. Now, this is at a time in American history where this trial was actually broadcasted on the radio, and everyone who was anyone had a radio at this time. So when Darrow cross-examined Bryan, he will relentlessly question Bryan about his beliefs, whether or not if Bryan agreed with a bishop's assertion that life started at the year 4004, not realizing that, hey, many ancient world civilizations had been thriving well before that time. And there were questions about whether or not Bryan knew if Earth was created in 6 days, like God had said, like the Bible says. And he said, quote, not 6 days of 24 hours. And the crowd gasped. Here's a picture of fundamentalists in the 1920s. You have William Jennings Bryan on the left, John T. Scopes in the middle, Clarence Darrow on the right. Last slide. So, with this answer, Bryan admitted that the Bible might be interpreted in different ways. You don't say. In spite of this admission, Scopes was still found guilty and fined $100. The Tennessee Supreme Court later changed the verdict based on a technicality, but the law outlawing the teaching of evolution remained in effect. This says remind. It should say remained. To this day, teaching evolution remains a controversial topic in some communities. And this clash over evolution, the Prohibition experiment, and emerging urban scene all were evidence of the changes and conflicts during the 1920s. During this period, women also experienced conflict as they will redefine their roles and pursue new lifestyles. And here you have a political cartoon of monkeys. This is often called the Scopes monkey trial, obviously for the teaching of evolution. And here you have monkeys, speak not, hear not, see not, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. But it's evolution. Dun dun dun. All right. We're we're going to stop there. A little quicker than normal, not your typical 25-minute shenanigans piece, but you know, we're done. You took notes. All right. Your homework will be page 385, 3 through 5. All right, page 385, 3 through 5. So yeah, if you guys did enjoy that, leave a like, leave a thumbs up for such a short lecture video. Um, who knows? Maybe I'll make shorter ones. Anyways, hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.